Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Margaret Sullivan, a 67-year-old grandmother who uncovers her son's plot to steal her money and institutionalize her. With cunning and resolve, she reclaims her power, delivers justice, and builds a new life. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly stories of truth and empowerment. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The kitchen was a sanctuary of routine, its familiar hum of simmering pots and the faint scent of lavender dish soap wrapping me in a deceptive calm. I stood at the counter chopping carrots for the stew, the rhythmic thud of the knife a metronome to my thoughts. At 67, I'd learned to find solace in these small acts, cooking, tending to the house, weaving love into every mundane task for my granddaughter Emma. But that evening, as the autumn light bled gold through the window, something shifted. A shadow flickered in the corner of my vision, not in the room, but in my heart, a premonition I couldn't name. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her crayons scattered like confetti, her small hands sketching a world of rainbows and unicorns. Her blue eyes, so like her grandfather Frank's, sparkled with innocence. I smiled at her, my heart swelling, unaware that her next words would unravel the fragile tapestry of my life. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft clink of my knife. She glanced toward the hallway, as if afraid the walls themselves might overhear. "I heard Mommy and Daddy talking last night. They said they're putting you in a home today, and they're taking all your money." The knife slipped, nicking my finger. A bead of blood welled up bright and accusing, but the pain was nothing compared to the wildfire igniting in my chest. Rage, sharp and molten, surged through me, yet I forced a smile, patting Emma's head with a trembling hand. "Oh, sweetheart, you must have misheard," I said, my voice steady despite the storm within. "Grown-ups say silly things sometimes." But Emma's eyes held no doubt, only fear. She leaned closer, her whisper urgent. "They were in the study, Grandma. Daddy said it's all planned. They're signing papers this afternoon. They called it Shady Pines or something." Shady Pines. The name struck like a bell tolling betrayal. I'd overheard Brian and Jessica mention it once, months ago, dismissing it as a retirement community when I pressed. Now the pieces clicked into place with a sickening clarity. My son and daughter-in-law, the vultures circling my life since Frank's death, had been weaving a web I hadn't seen until now. I knelt beside Emma, my knees creaking, and cupped her face. "You're a brave girl for telling me, Emma. This is our little secret, okay?" She nodded, her small hand clutching mine, and I felt a spark of something ancient awaken within me, a strength I thought had dimmed with age. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The clock on the wall ticked towards 6 each second, a drumbeat counting down to Brian and Jessica's return. They'd left that morning all smiles and vague excuses about errands, their voices dripping with rehearsed warmth. I'd believed them, or at least, I'd wanted to. Grief has a way of blinding you, dulling the edges of suspicion. 18 months ago, when Frank's heart gave out in the middle of a quiet Sunday, I'd been too shattered to question their sudden concern. Brian, my only son, had swept in with Jessica, their tears as polished as their promises. "Mom, you can't live alone anymore." Brian had set his hand on my shoulder, his eyes soft with feigned worry. "Come stay with us. We'll take care of you." I'd been a fool to mistake their greed for love. They didn't want me. They wanted my house, my savings, the life insurance payout Frank had left behind. I'd sold our 3-bedroom home, the one where Frank and I had raised. Brian laughed through 32 years of marriage and planned a quiet retirement. $600,000 gone to pay off their mortgage and debts, while I became their live-in nanny, their ATM, their invisible servant. But Emma's words had torn the veil away, and now I saw the truth in the shadows they thought I'd never notice. I glanced at the old oak clock, a relic from Frank's parents, its hands pointing to a future I could still seize. My fingers tightened around the knife, not in violence, but in resolve. I wasn't the frail widow they imagined easily shuffled into a nursing home. I was Margaret Sullivan, and I had a plan. I sent Emma back to her, coloring her innocent hums a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my mind. Moving quietly, I slipped into the hallway, my steps silent on the hardwood floor. The house felt different now, its walls no longer a haven, but a stage for deception. I retrieved my purse from the hall closet, the one I had started carrying everywhere since Frank's death. Inside were my important documents, bank statements, Frank's will, a faded photo of us dancing at our wedding. Call it intuition, or perhaps a widow's sixth sense. But I'd known this day might come. I dialed David Morrison, my lawyer and old high school friend, my fingers trembling not with fear, but with purpose. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered, Maggie. Everything okay? David, I need an emergency appointment. Today, 2 o'clock work for you. My voice was calm, but inside I was a coiled spring, a pause. What's going on, Maggie? Let's just say some chickens are about to come home to roost. I hung up before he could press further, my heart pounding with a strange exhilaration. Next, I called First National Bank, where Frank and I had banked for 40 years. This is Margaret Sullivan, account number 47789. I said, my tone clipped. I need to speak with someone about transferring funds. Immediately. The representative's voice was professional, but I caught a flicker of curiosity. Of course, Mrs. Sullivan. Let me pull up your account. As she typed, I paced the kitchen, my eyes darting to Emma, who was now sketching a dragon with fierce determination. The representative returned, her voice tinged with surprise. Your accounts are substantial. Between the life insurance payout your savings and the house proceeds, you have 637 and 412. I closed my eyes, the number a lifeline. Frank had always been meticulous planning for our future, even as his heart betrayed him. Brian and Jessica thought they knew my worth, but they'd underestimated me in every way. I want it all moved to a new account at Commerce Bank. Today. Everything, she asked. Hesitant. Everything. My voice was steel. I hung up and turned to Emma, who looked up with those bright, trusting eyes. Sweetie, I said, ruffling her hair, how would you like to help Grandma with a very special project? Her face lit up, oblivious to the gravity of what she'd set in motion. What kind of project? The kind that teaches people not to count their chickens before they hatch. I smiled, but my mind was racing, piecing together a plan as intricate as the lace curtains Frank had loved. I glanced at the clock again, 1:15. Brian and Jessica would be back by 4, expecting their compliant old mother ready to be packed off to Shady Pines. Instead, they'd find a woman who'd just reclaimed her power. I grabbed my coat, the weight of my purse a comforting anchor. Emma, we're going for a walk. She bounced to her feet, her crayons forgotten. Where to, Grandma? To the coffee shop on the corner. We're meeting a friend. I didn't tell her that friend was David, or that this walk would mark the beginning of their undoing. As we stepped outside, the autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and possibility. The street was quiet, but I felt eyes watching not from the neighbors, but from some unseen force, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The coffee shop was a cozy haven, its walls lined with books and the air thick with the aroma of roasted beans. David was already there, his silver hair catching the light as he sipped an espresso. He rose when he saw us, his brow furrowing at the urgency in my eyes. Maggie, what's this about? He asked. As I settled Emma with a hot chocolate and a puzzle book at a nearby table, I leaned in, my voice low, each word a spark. Brian and Jessica are planning to put me in a nursing home today. They think I'm a helpless old woman they can rob blind. They're wrong. David's eyes widened, but he nodded, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. What do you want to do? Everything! My voice was a blade sharp and unyielding. New will revoke their power of attorney, transfer my accounts the works. And David, I want it done before they get back from their so-called errands. He glanced at Emma, then back at me, a grim smile tugging at his lips. You're a force of nature, Maggie. Let's get to work. As we walked to his office, Emma skipping beside me, humming a tune, I felt a strange energy pulse through me. It wasn't just anger. It was something older, deeper, a power I'd forgotten I possessed. The streets seemed to hum with secrets, the shadows whispering of betrayals yet to be uncovered. I'd been blind for too long, but now my eyes were open, and I saw everything. In David's office, while Emma played with toys in the waiting room, I sat across from him, my hands steady, despite the storm within. They underestimated me, David. I said, my voice low but fierce. They thought grief made me weak. They're about to learn otherwise. He slid a stack of papers across his desk, his expression unreadable. This is just the beginning, Maggie. Are you ready for what comes next? I met his gaze, my heart a furnace of resolve. I was born ready. The door to David Morrison's law office closed behind us with a soft click, sealing us into a world of leather-bound books and the faint scent of aged paper. The waiting room was a cocoon of calm, its muted greens and warm lamplight a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. Emma, oblivious to the gravity of our mission, settled into a corner with a pile of colorful blocks, your small hands building a castle as if she could reshape the world with her innocence. I envied her for a moment, the way children could find joy in the chaos of adult betrayals. But I had no time for envy. The clock was ticking, and I was weaving a web to ensnare those who thought they could trap me. David's office was a fortress of order, his desk, a battlefield of neatly stacked files, and a single framed photo of his late wife, her smile a quiet reminder of loyalties that endure. He gestured to a chair across from him, his eyes sharp with the same curiosity I remembered from our high school days when he'd been the boy who could unravel any puzzle. All right, Maggie, he said, leaning forward, his voice low but steady. Tell me everything. I took a deep breath, the air heavy with the weight of my discovery. Brian and Jessica are planning to ship me off to Shady Pines. Today, they think they can declare me incompetent, seize my money, and discard me like an old coat. Emma overheard them last night plotting in their study like thieves in the dark. David's brow furrowed, but he didn't interrupt. I continued my words, spilling out like a river breaking its banks. They've been manipulating me since Frank died. They convinced me to sell our home, took the $600,000 for their debts, and turned me into their unpaid nanny for Emma. I thought it was love. David, I was blind. He leaned back, his fingers steepled, processing the betrayal with the calm of a man who'd seen too many family secrets. And you're sure about Emma's account? She's only 8. Emma doesn't lie. I said, my voice firm. She's the only one in that house who sees me as more than a means to an end. She heard them mention Shady Pines' power of attorney, my savings, everything. They think I'm too old, too broken to fight back. They're wrong. A faint smile tugged at David's lips, a spark of admiration in his eyes. You've always been a force, Maggie. What's the plan? Everything I said, my voice a blade honed by rage and resolve. Revoke their power of attorney, transfer my accounts to a bank they can't touch, rewrite my will, And I want it all done before they get back at 4. They're out running errands, likely signing papers to lock me away. David nodded, already reaching for a legal pad. We can do that, but it's a tight timeline. Let's start with the finances. How much are we talking about? I pulled a folded bank statement from my purse. The number's a lifeline I'd clung to since my call to First National. 637 412. Frank's life insurance, our retirement savings, and what's left of the house proceeds after they took their share. They don't know the full amount. They think I'm clueless. David's eyebrows shot up, but he recovered quickly, scribbling notes. That's substantial. We'll move it to Commerce Bank, a new account under your name only. Next, the power of attorney. Brian and Jessica have it. Yes. I admitted a bitter taste in my mouth. I signed it after Frank's death when Brian insisted it was for my protection. Another lie. We'll revoke it and designate me as your agent if you're comfortable with that. David said, his tone reassuring. Then the will. Who's in it now? Brian gets everything with a trust for Emma's education. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. But that changes today. I want Emma to inherit it all held in trust until she's 25. Brian and Jessica get nothing. David paused, his pen hovering. That's a bold move, Maggie. It'll hit them hard. Good, I said, my eyes locking onto his. They planned to steal my life. Let them feel the weight of their own choices. He nodded, a grim determination settling over him. All right. I'll draft the revocation and the new will. We'll need witnesses for the signatures, but I can arrange that here. The bank transfer might take longer, but I know someone at Commerce who owes me a favor. We'll make it happen. I glanced at my watch, 1:45. Time was slipping through my fingers, but I felt a strange calm, as if the universe itself was aligning with my resolve. There's one more thing, I said, leaning closer. The $600, $1,000 I gave them for the house. I want it back. They promised I'd live with them permanently. If they're breaking that promise, they owe me. David's eyes narrowed, a lawyer's mind already spinning. No formal loan agreement, correct? None, I confirmed. But I have emails, bank records, their own words promising me a home. Can we use that? It's tricky but possible, he said, jotting down more notes. We can argue it was a conditional gift contingent on you living there. If they breach that, they owe you restitution. Principal interest, maybe even damages for emotional distress. It's a strong case. I smiled a predator's smile, though inside my heart ached. Brian was my son, my flesh and blood, and yet he'd become a stranger, a shadow of the boy I'd raised. Do it, I said. All of it. As David began drafting the documents, I stepped into the waiting room to check on Emma. She was stacking blocks into a tower, her tongue poking out in concentration. I knelt beside her, my voice soft. You're doing great, sweetheart. Grandma's just finishing some grown-up business, okay? She looked up, her eyes wide with trust. Is this about what Mommy and Daddy said? My heart stuttered, but I kept my expression gentle. It's about making sure everything's fair, Emma. Sometimes grown-ups need to fix things they didn't see coming. She nodded, returning to her tower, and I marveled at her resilience. She was my anchor, my reason to fight, and in her innocence, I saw a flicker of something almost otherworldly, a spark of truth that had pierced the veil of deceit. I stood my resolve, hardening. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting her future, too. Back in David's office, the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He slid a stack of papers across the desk, each one a weapon in my arsenal. This revokes their power of attorney, he said, pointing to the first document. This sets up the new account at Commerce Bank. And this, he tapped a thicker packet. is your new will. Emma's trust is ironclad. They can't touch it. I scanned the pages, the legal jargon, a foreign language I was learning to wield. And the house money. I have drafted a demand letter, David said, sliding another document forward. It outlines the $600,000 as a conditional gift with evidence from your emails and bank records. If they fight it, we'll take it to court. With interest and damages, they could owe you upwards of $700,000. I signed each document with a flourish, my hand steady despite the storm within. Each stroke of the pen felt like a reclamation, a step toward freedom. But as I signed, a memory flickered Frank's voice, soft and teasing the night we sold the house. "You sure about this, Maggie? It's our home." I'd trusted Brian, then believed his promises of family. Now that trust was ash, and I was building something new from the ruins. We left David's office at 2:30, the papers tucked securely in my purse. Emma skipped beside me, humming a tune that seemed to carry an echo of something ancient, like a melody from a forgotten dream. The streets were alive with the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of traffic, but I felt a strange stillness, as if time itself was bending to my will. I glanced at my watch, less than 2 hours, until Brian and Jessica returned, expecting their docile mother ready to be shipped off to Shady Pines. Instead, they'd face a woman who'd outmaneuvered them at every turn. Our next stop was Commerce Bank, a sleek building across town with glass walls that reflected the graying sky. Emma sat in the children's area, a lollipop in hand, her eyes fixed on a cartoon playing on a small screen. I met with Janet, the branch manager, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She studied the transfer request, her fingers pausing on the keyboard. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is highly irregular. You want to move 637, 412, everything today." "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering. "Every penny." Janet's gaze flickered with curiosity, but she didn't press. "It's a substantial amount." Are you sure I thought of Brian's averted eyes that morning, the way he'd mumbled about errands? Jessica's too tight hug, a farewell disguised as affection. The pieces of their plan were falling into place, each one a betrayal sharper than the last. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The transfer took an hour each minute, a pulse of power reclaimed. Janet's fingers flew across her keyboard, and I watched as my life's savings. Frank's insurance, our retirement, the remnants of our home slipped out of Brian and Jessica's reach. 637 to 412, a fortune they'd assumed would be theirs once they had me declared incompetent. I smiled at Janet, a secret shared between us. Some people are about to learn you don't count your chickens before they hatch. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her professionalism a shield. As we finalized the transfer, a shadow passed over the glass wall behind her, fleeting but unmistakable. Not a person, not a cloud, just a flicker, like a memory trying to surface. I shook it off, but it lingered, a whisper of something I couldn't yet name. Back at the house by 3:30, I sent Emma to her room to play her footsteps light on the stairs. The kitchen was my domain again, and I began preparing dinner pot roast with mashed potatoes, Brian and Jessica's favorite. If this was to be my last meal in their house, I wanted it to be a masterpiece, a final act of deception before I revealed my hand. As I peeled potatoes, the knife steady in my grip, I let my mind wander to the past 18 months, piecing together the clues I had missed. The signs had been there, hidden in plain sight. Brian's insistence that I sell the house, his eyes gleaming when he heard the sale price. Jessica's sudden warmth after years of cool distance, her compliments laced with calculation. The way they'd isolated me, canceling my book club invitations, turning away church friends with excuses about my health. They'd woven a cage around me, and I'd walked into it grief-blinded and trusting. But grief doesn't last forever, and neither does ignorance. I glanced at the oak clock, 3:45. Their car would pull into the driveway soon, their voices loud with false cheer. I smoothed my apron, catching my reflection in the kitchen window. I looked like the grandmother they expected, harmless, compliant, a relic of a life they thought they could control. Perfect. But beneath the surface, I was something else entirely. A woman who'd survived loss, who'd built a life with Frank through decades of sacrifice, who'd learned to listen to the whispers of intuition. As I set the table, a strange certainty settled over me, like a cloak woven from starlight. This wasn't just about money or betrayal. There was something deeper at play, a secret buried in the shadows of Frank's death waiting to be unearthed. I couldn't see it yet, but I felt it like a pulse beneath the floorboards. The front door creaked open, and their voices filled the house bright and brittle. "Mom, we're home." Brian called, his tone too cheerful, a mask slipping over guilt. "Something smells amazing." "Just making your favorite." I called back, my voice warm, my smile a weapon. "Emma's in her room. How were your errands?" A pause, heavy with unspoken lies. "Fine," Jessica said, her voice tight. "Just running around town." I smiled to myself, stirring the pot roast. They thought they were clever, plotting my downfall while I cooked their dinner. But I was already 3 steps ahead, my web spun my trap set. The game was about to begin, and I was no longer the prey. The kitchen was a stage, and I was its director, orchestrating a performance no one would forget. The pot roast simmered on the stove, its rich aroma curling through the air like a siren's song masking the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. I mashed potatoes with deliberate care, each press of the masher a silent vow to reclaim what was mine. The oak clock on the wall ticked toward 4, its hands slicing through the minutes with relentless precision. Brian and Jessica would be home soon, their voices bright with lies, their steps heavy with guilt. They thought they held the script to this evening's drama, but I'd rewritten the ending. Emma's laughter drifted from her room upstairs, a beacon of light in the gathering shadows. I'd sent her there to play shielding her from the confrontation to come. She was my heart, my reason to fight, but she didn't need to see the ugliness of her parents' betrayal. Not yet. The table was set with care white plates, polished silver, a vase of daisies I'd picked from the garden that morning. Everything was perfect, a portrait of domestic tranquility. But beneath the surface, a current of power surged through me, electric and unyielding, as if the house itself was whispering secrets only I could hear. I smoothed my apron, catching my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman staring back was 67, her hair streaked with silver, her eyes etched with the lines of loss. But there was something else in those eyes now, a fire, a knowing. I wasn't the frail widow Brian and Jessica expected, the one they planned to shuffle off to Shady Pines. I was Margaret Sullivan, and I was ready to burn their carefully laid plans to ash. The front door creaked open at 3:55, right on cue. Their voices spilled into the house, overly cheerful, like actors overplaying their parts. "Mom, we're home." Brian called, his tone bright but brittle, a crack in his facade. "Something smells amazing." "Just making your favorite," I replied, my voice warm as honey, my smile a mask. "Emma's in her room. How are your errands?" A pause, heavy with the weight of their deceit. "Fine," Jessica said, her voice too tight, too quick. "Just running around town." I stirred the pot roast, my back to them, hiding the curve of my lips. Running around town. To Shady Pines, no doubt, signing papers to lock me away, to seize the 637 fortune they thought was theirs for the taking. They had no idea I'd spent the day dismantling their scheme thread by thread with David Morrison's help. My purse, tucked beneath the counter, held the documents that would change everything. Revoked power of attorney, a new will, bank accounts moved beyond their reach. And the demand letter, a ticking bomb that would detonate their world. Dinner was a masterpiece of deception, a ballet of smiles and small talk choreographed to conceal the truth. I served their plates with extra care, piling the pot roast, high-spooning mashed potatoes with a flourish. Brian sat across from me, his eyes darting to Jessica, who fidgeted with her napkin, her new haircut framing a face taut with unease. They were nervous, their guilt a palpable fog in the room. I played my part perfectly, asking about their day with genuine interest, complimenting Jessica's blouse, laughing at Brian's half-hearted joke about traffic. "This roast is incredible, Mom," Bryson said, though his fork barely touched the food. "You really outdid yourself." "Well, I wanted tonight to be special," I said, my smile warm. My words a velvet trap. You never know when things might change. Jessica nearly choked on her mashed potatoes, her eyes flicking to Brian. "Change?" she asked, her voice sharp with worry. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just life in general, dear," I said, sipping my water, my gaze steady. "Nothing stays the same forever, does it?" The tension was thick, a blade hovering above the table. Emma chattered about school, oblivious to the undercurrent swirling around us, her stories of art projects and playground games, a bright thread in the darkening tapestry. I watched Brian and Jessica exchange glances, their unease growing with every passing minute. They thought they were in control, that I was the docile mother they could manipulate. They were wrong. At 7, Brian cleared his throat, his fingers drumming on the table. "Mom, could we talk to you in the living room? Emma, go play in your room for a bit. Here it comes." I thought my heart a steady drumbeat, the moment they'd been building up to all day. I nodded, wiping my hands on my apron, and followed them to the living room. They sat on the couch, their postures stiff, while I took my favorite chair by the window, its faded cushions a reminder of simpler times. Outside, the autumn dusk cast long shadows, and for a moment I felt a chill, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the truth to break free. Brian fidgeted, his hands twisting together, his eyes avoiding mine. Jessica stared at the coffee table, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, Brian spoke, his voice strained. "Mom, Jessica and I have been talking, and we think it might be time for you to consider other living arrangements." I tilted my head, the picture of innocent confusion. "Other arrangements? You mean like getting my own apartment?" "Not exactly." Jessica jumped in her voice, artificially sweet, like sugar laced with poison. "We were thinking more along the lines of assisted living, somewhere with people your own age, activities, medical staff on hand." "You mean a nursing home?" I said, my tone flat, cutting through their euphemisms. "It's not a nursing home," Brian said quickly, his eyes darting to Jessica. "It's a lovely community. We visited today, Shady Pines. They have a beautiful facility, great programs. You've already made arrangements, haven't you?" I asked, my voice soft but sharp, a blade hidden in silk. Another glance between them, a silent confirmation of their guilt. "We thought we'd explore options," Brian said weakly, his hands clenching into fists. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch heavy and suffocating. They expected tears, protests, perhaps begging. Instead, I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips that made Jessica's eyes widen. "Well, that's interesting timing," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Because I spent today exploring options, too." I scrolled to David's contact and pressed call. my heart pounding with a strange exhilaration. "David, it's Margaret. Could you come over now?" "Yes, I think it's time." Brian's face went pale, his voice barely a whisper. "Mom, what are you doing? Taking care of business, sweetheart?" I said, standing and smoothing my skirt. "Just like you taught me. David Morrison will be here in 10 minutes to explain some changes I've made today. You might want to sit down." Jessica grabbed Brian's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "What is she talking about?" The doorbell rang exactly 10 minutes later, a sharp chime that cut through the tension like a guillotine. I opened the door to find David, his briefcase in hand, his expression grim but resolute. "Good evening, Margaret," he said, nodding to Brian and Jessica, who looked like they were facing a firing squad. Brian, Jessica. I gestured to the armchair across from the couch. "David, why don't you explain what we accomplished today?" He settled into the chair, his movements deliberate, his briefcase snapping open with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. Emma, thankfully, had fallen asleep upstairs, spared from the storm about to break. "Where should I begin?" David asked, his eyes meeting mine. "The power of attorney seems like a good place," I suggested, my voice sweet, but laced with steel. David nodded, pulling out a document. "As of today, Brian and Jessica Sullivan no longer have any legal authority over Margaret Sullivan's affairs. The power of attorney they were planning to use has been formally revoked." Brian shot to his feet, his face flushed. "Planning to use... We weren't planning anything." "Sit down, son," I said quietly, my voice a low, dangerous hum. "We both know that's a lie." Jessica's face was white as snow, her hands trembling. "Margaret, I don't understand. Why would you do this?" I looked directly at her, my gaze unwavering. "Because 8-year-olds have better hearing than you think. Emma told me about your conversation last night about putting me in a home and taking my money." The silence that followed was deafening, a void where their excuses should have been. Brian sank back onto the couch, his face a mask of panic. Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I felt a strange calm, as if the room itself was bending to my will, the shadows in the corners deepening, whispering secrets only I could hear. "David," I continued, my voice steady, "would you mind explaining the financial arrangements?" "Certainly," he said, pulling out another document. "Mrs. Sullivan has transferred all her assets to new accounts at Commerce Bank, a location you're unaware of. This includes approximately $637,000, her life savings insurance proceeds, and the money from the sale of her home. You can't do this." Jessica finally found her voice, her words shrill. "That money you gave us, that money, actually," David said calmly. "I've reviewed the situation. There was no formal loan agreement for the $600,000 Margaret provided for your mortgage and debts. It was a gift contingent on her living here permanently. If that arrangement is terminated, she has the right to demand repayment." He paused, his eyes cold. "With interest?" I leaned forward, my smile predatory. "That comes to about $700,000 all told. Every penny you thought was yours, plus compensation for the last 18 months of rent, babysitting, and emotional distress." Brian ran his hands through his hair, his voice shaking. "Mom, please, let's talk about this reasonably. You don't understand what you're doing." "Oh, but I do," I said, standing, my voice ringing with a power I hadn't felt in years. "I understand you've been planning to have me declared incompetent to control my finances. I understand you've isolated me from my friends, treated me like unpaid help. And I understand you've been counting money that was never yours. We were trying to protect you." Brian's voice rose desperate. "You're 67 years old. Living on your own isn't safe." I'm not living on my own. I said my words, cutting through his lies. I'm living with people who see me as a burden and a bank account. There's a difference. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes glistening with crocodile's tears. Margaret, we can work this out. Maybe we approached this wrong, but we do care about you. I laughed, a sound sharp enough to shatter glass. You care about my Social Security check. You care about free babysitting. You care about my money, but you don't care about me. David cleared his throat, drawing their attention. There's one more matter we need to discuss. My smile widened, a hunter closing in on her prey. Ah, yes, the best part. He pulled out another folder, his voice measured. Margaret has updated her will. The previous version left her entire estate to Brian with provisions for Emma's education. The new version makes significant changes. Brian's face had gone from pale to green, his voice barely a whisper. What kind of changes? I stepped forward, delivering the blow myself. The kind where Emma gets everything held in trust until she's 25. You and Jessica get nothing, not one penny. Jessica let out a sound between a gasp and a wail. You can't do this to us. We have a mortgage, car payments, Emma's future to think about. You should have thought about that before you decided to rob me blind. I said, my voice cold, unyielding. Did you really think I was so stupid I wouldn't figure out your plan? Shady Pines costs $4,000 a month. You had it all calculated, didn't you? Put me away, sell my belongings, control my money, and pocket the difference. Brian's hands shook, his voice breaking. Mom, I'm your son, your only child. Dad would want you to take care of me. That was his mistake invoking Frank's name. I walked to the mantelpiece where Frank's photo sat, his kind eyes staring out from a moment frozen in time. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the frame, a pang of grief mingling with my rage. Your father, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, worked 2 jobs for 30 years so we could save every penny for our retirement. He went without so we could build something to leave you. And you planned to steal it while I was still alive. I set the photo down, turning to face them. The room felt charged, the air thick with an unseen energy as if Frank's spirit was watching, waiting. You know what your father would say if he could see you now? He'd say, I should have done this sooner. David stood snapping his briefcase shut, the sound of final punctuation. There's one more document, he said, his voice grim. An eviction notice. Margaret no longer feels safe living here. As a tenant without a lease, you have 30 days to find her alternative arrangements. Eviction notice. Brian's voice cracked, his eyes wide with disbelief. This is our house. Actually, I said, pulling a folder from my purse. That's where things get interesting. Remember the $600,000 I gave you? I have bank records showing the transfer came from my account to yours, specifically to pay off your mortgage and credit cards. No loan documents were signed, but there are emails where you promised I'd always have a home here. Jessica's face crumpled, understanding dawning like a cold dawn. You want the money back. Every single penny, I said, my voice sweet but lethal. Plus the 18 months of rent you should have paid the money you saved on babysitting and compensation for emotional distress. I figure that comes to about $700. Brian's voice was barely a whisper. We don't have that kind of money. Then you'll have to get creative, I said, shrugging. Sell the house, liquidate your retirement accounts, get second jobs, or declare bankruptcy. Either way, you won't be doing it on my dime anymore. David moved toward the door, his briefcase in hand. I'll leave you folks to process this. Margaret, your new apartment is ready whenever you want to move in. Jessica called out, her voice desperate. What about Emma? You can't just abandon your granddaughter. I paused at the base of the stairs, my hand on the banister, my heart aching for the child caught in this web of deceit. I'm not abandoning Emma, I said, my voice soft but firm. I'm teaching her a lesson about what happens when you betray the people who love you. She'll understand someday. I climbed the stairs to pack my things, leaving Brian and Jessica in the wreckage of their shattered plans. The shadows in the house seemed to deepen, curling around me like allies, whispering of secrets yet to be uncovered. As I reached the landing, a cold breeze brushed my skin, though the windows were closed. It felt like a warning or a promise. This wasn't the end. There was more to this story, buried in the past, waiting to surface. And I would find it. The night after the confrontation felt like a turning point, as if the house itself had exhaled, releasing a tension that had clung to its walls for months. I lay in the guest room, the one Brian and Jessica had relegated me to, staring at the ceiling where moonlight cast strange, shifting patterns. Sleep eluded me. Not because of the argument or the eviction notice I'd served, but because of a nagging sensation, a whisper in the back of my mind like a memory trying to claw its way free. The shadows on the ceiling seemed to pulse, forming shapes that weren't quite random. A hand, a face, a fleeting glimpse of Frank's smile. I shook my head, dismissing it as exhaustion, but the unease lingered, a cold stone in my stomach. There was more to this betrayal, something buried deeper than Brian and Jessica's greed. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Emma's laughter drifting from the kitchen, a reminder of why I was fighting. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blouse and pearl earrings armor for the battles ahead. My purse, now a talisman of my reclaimed power, held the documents David had prepared. The revoked power of attorney, the new will, the demand letter for the $600,000. But as I descended the stairs, my steps slowed, a chill brushing my skin despite the warmth of the house. It was as if the air carried a warning, a premonition of truths yet to be uncovered. Emma was at the table eating cereal, her stuffed rabbit propped beside her. Brian and Jessica were nowhere to be seen, likely licking their wounds after last night's reckoning. I kissed Emma's forehead, my heart aching for her innocence. "Morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" She nodded, her eyes bright but shadowed with questions. "Are you still mad at Mommy and Daddy? Grandma?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I'm disappointed, Emma, but I love you, and that's what matters most." She smiled, returning to her cereal, and I marveled at her resilience. But as I poured myself coffee, my phone buzzed on the counter, David's name flashing on the screen. I stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind me, my pulse quickening. "David, what's up?" His voice was low, urgent. "Maggie, we have a problem. I've been digging into Frank's insurance policy, and there's something you need to know. Can you meet me at the office in an hour?" "What kind of problem?" I asked, my voice steady despite the sudden tightness in my chest. "It's complicated. Just come. And bring that intuition of yours. You're going to need it." I hung up, my mind racing. The shadows from last night seemed to follow me, curling at the edges of my vision, whispering of secrets Frank had kept. I told Emma I'd be back soon, entrusting her to the neighbor's care, and drove to David's office, the autumn streets a blur of crimson and gold. The air felt charged, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next revelation to break. David's office was a familiar refuge, its walls lined with books that seemed to hum with the weight of countless stories. He was waiting behind his desk, his expression grim, a folder open before him. "Maggie, sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair. "This isn't going to be easy." I sat, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, bracing for impact. "Just tell me, David, what did you find?" He slid a document across the desk, its edges worn as if it had been handled too many times. Frank had a second life insurance policy, a big one, $2 million purchased 5 years before he died. You weren't the only beneficiary. The room seemed to tilt, the air growing heavy, oppressive. What do you mean, not the only beneficiary? Someone named Linda Morrison. David said, his voice careful. She got half. $1 million. The name hit me like a physical blow, a shard of glass piercing my heart. Linda Morrison, Frank's secretary at the engineering firm, the pretty blonde who'd always lingered too long at company picnics, her laughter too bright, her smiles too familiar. I'd dismissed it as paranoia, a wife's insecurity. But now the truth was undeniable. A wound reopened. Linda Morrison. I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and grief. Frank was involved with her. David's eyes softened, but he didn't sugarcoat it. It looks that way. The insurance company cut 2 checks, one to you for $1 million, one to her for $1 million. But here's the problem, Maggie. You only received $500,000 from Frank's policy. Brian handled the paperwork after the funeral. He told you that was the total after taxes and fees. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening clarity, each one a betrayal sharper than the last. Brian stole $500,000 from me. I said, my voice flat, the weight of it crushing. He knew about Linda, didn't he? David nodded, his expression grim. It gets worse. I found emails between Brian and Linda dated right after Frank's death. He convinced her the insurance company made an error, that she was entitled to the full $1 million. He showed her forged documents to back it up. I closed my eyes, the room spinning, the shadows in the corners, deepening, as if Frank's ghost was watching, ashamed. My husband had betrayed me with an affair, leaving $1 million to his mistress. My son had stolen half of my share to cover it up, profiting from my grief. The 2 men I'd trusted most in the world had conspired against me, one in life, one in death. But instead of despair, something else rose within me, a crystalline rage, sharp and unyielding like a blade forged in starlight. I opened my eyes, meeting David's gaze. What else did you find? He hesitated, as if weighing whether I could handle more. There's a hint of something irregular in how the policy was set up. Burke, their lawyer, is sniffing around, claiming you weren't aware of all the beneficiaries. He's pushing for a psychological evaluation, arguing you're not competent to make these financial decisions. They're still trying to have me declared incompetent, I said, my voice low, dangerous. Even after last night. It's a Hail Mary, David said, leaning forward. They know they're losing, so they're throwing everything at the wall. But Maggie, there's something else. Burke hinted that Frank might have been planning to change the policy before he died. There's a paper trail, memos, phone calls to the insurance company. I'm still digging, but it suggests Frank had second thoughts about Linda. A chill ran down my spine, the shadows in the room seeming to pulse, as if Frank's presence was trying to speak. Second thoughts. I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What does that mean? I don't know yet, David admitted. But it could mean Frank was trying to make things right. Or it could mean someone stopped him before he could. The implication hung between us, heavy and unspoken. Frank's heart attack had been sudden, unexplained, a tragedy we'd accepted as fate. But now doubt crept in, a seed planted in the fertile soil of betrayal. Had there been more to his death, I pushed the thought away, focusing on the present. What do we do now? We fight. David said, his voice firm. The evaluation is scheduled for Friday with Dr. Patricia Coleman. She's independent fair. You'll need to be sharp, Maggie. They're banking on painting you as confused, unstable. I smiled a predator's smile. Let them try. That afternoon, I drove to Emma's school, the weight of David's revelations pressing against my chest. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves a riot of color, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in the web of Frank's secrets. I parked across the street, watching as children spilled onto the playground after dismissal. Emma emerged, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her face sadder than I remembered. She looked small, fragile, caught in a storm she didn't understand. I stepped out of the car and called her name. Her eyes lit up, and she ran to me, nearly knocking me over with her hug. "Grandma, I missed you so much. Why did you leave?" My heart broke a crack in the armor I'd built. "I had to, sweetheart," I said, kneeling to her level. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and other grown-ups have to protect themselves." "Are you coming home?" she asked, her voice small, hopeful. "I can't, Emma," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But maybe you could visit me sometime. My new apartment has a pool." Her eyes widened, a spark of joy piercing the gloom. "Really? Really?" I said, hugging her tight. "Ask your parents if you can come this weekend. I love you, baby girl. Don't ever forget that." As I drove away, Jessica's car pulled into the school lot. She must have seen me because my phone buzzed immediately, her name flashing on the screen. I didn't answer. Let her stew in her guilt, I thought, my hands steady on the wheel. But the shadows in the car seemed to shift, a fleeting shape in the rearview mirror like Frank's silhouette watching me. I blinked, and it was gone, but the unease lingered, a whisper of secrets yet to be uncovered. Friday morning arrived gray and heavy with the promise of rain. I dressed for the psychological evaluation in my best navy suit, the pearl earrings a quiet nod to the woman I'd been before Frank's death, poised, capable, unbreakable. Dr. Patricia Coleman's office was a sterile contrast to David's cozy sanctuary, its walls lined with diplomas and abstract art that felt oddly cold. Dr. Coleman, younger than I had expected, greeted me with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, her demeanor professional but warm. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, gesturing to a chair. "This evaluation was requested by your son's attorney, but I work independently. I'm here to assess your mental state, not to take sides." I appreciate that, I said, sitting with my back straight, my hands folded. The room felt charged, as if the shadows were listening, waiting for my performance. For 2 hours, she tested me cognitive exercises, memory, tasks, questions about my recent decisions. I answered with clarity, recounting the bank transfer, the new will, the demand letter with precision. I explained my reasoning, each word a brick in the wall of my competence. You have a clear recall of events and strong analytical skills. Dr. Coleman noted her pen scratching against her notepad. "Can you tell me about your relationship with your son and daughter-in-law?" I chose my words carefully, my voice steady. "They're struggling financially, and I think they saw me as a solution to their problems rather than a person with my own needs and rights. Do you feel your recent actions might be considered extreme by some?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Dr. Coleman, if someone was planning to steal your life savings and have you committed against your will, what would you consider an appropriate response?" She made a note, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Point taken. As I left her office, the rain had begun a soft patter against the windows. I felt a strange calm, as if the storm outside was cleansing something within me. But the shadows followed a whisper in the rain, a hint of Frank's voice saying, "Look closer, Maggie." I shook it off, but the seed of doubt grew, its roots tangling with my anger. That evening, David called with an update, his voice tense. The evaluation went well. Dr. Coleman's recommending no conservatorship. "You're in the clear, Maggie. But there's something else." My stomach dropped, the shadows in my apartment seeming to deepen. "Tell me." Burke's digging into Frank's insurance policy. He's hinting at irregularities, something about a second beneficiary change that never went through. And Maggie, there's more. I have found a memo Frank wrote to his insurance agent dated a week before his death. He wanted to remove Linda Morrison entirely. The room spun, the air growing heavy, oppressive. Remove her. Why, I'm not sure, David said. But it suggests Frank was trying to protect you. There's also a record of a call he made to the insurance company, but it was cut off. The agent noted he sounded distressed. A chill ran through me, the shadows pulsing as if Frank's ghost was trying to break through. Distressed? David? Are you saying someone stopped him? I'm not saying anything yet, he said carefully. But we need to talk to Linda Morrison. She might know more than she's let on. The name burned in my mind, a wound that refused to heal. Linda Morrison, the woman who'd shared my husband's heart, who'd taken $1 million meant for me. And Brian, my son, who'd orchestrated the cover-up, stealing half my share to protect his father's secret. The betrayal was a labyrinth, each turn revealing a new layer of deceit. Set it up, I said, my voice cold, resolute. I want to talk to her. Monday morning, I sat in my car outside a suburban Atlanta coffee shop, the rain a steady drumbeat against the windshield. Linda Morrison Hayes, as she was now called, lived a comfortable life with her orthodontist husband and 2 teenage daughters. I'd found her through a quick internet search, her address a breadcrumb in the trail of Frank's secrets. My hands trembled as I dialed her number, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to uncover. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered, cautious, hesitant. Hello, Linda. This is Margaret Sullivan, Frank's wife. I said, my tone pleasant, conversational, though my heart was a furnace of rage. I think we need to talk about Frank's insurance policy. A long silence stretched so heavy I thought she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. Oh my God, Margaret. I wasn't expecting this. I'm very resourceful when I need to be, I said, my smile audible. I know about the $2 million policy. I know you received half. What I'm curious about is what you know about my half. Another pause, her breath shaky. Your son told me you'd received your portion. He said the insurance company made an error, sent 2 checks when there should have been 1. He told me to cash mine and not worry. My pulse quickened, the shadows in the car, seeming to pulse with my anger. When did you speak to Brian? Right after Frank died, she said, her voice breaking. He called to tell me about the funeral and the insurance situation. He said you were struggling with grief, that he was handling your finances temporarily. The audacity took my breath away. Brian had not only stolen my money, he'd enlisted Frank's mistress to cover it up, weaving a web of lies to keep me in the dark. Linda, I said, my voice steady, that check was supposed to be split between us. Frank left us each $500,000, not $1 million each. A gasp, sharp and raw. That's not what Brian said. He showed me paperwork. I thought forged paperwork. I interrupted, my voice cutting through her excuses. Brian lied to both of us. The question is, what are we going to do about it? The silence was heavy, charged with the weight of shared betrayal. Linda's voice, when it came, was small, broken. Margaret, I didn't know. I swear. Frank and it was a mistake years ago. He ended it. Said he loved you, wanted to make things right. Then why didn't he? I asked, my voice sharp, though my heart ached. Why did he leave you $1 million? He didn't, she said, her words tumbling out. He told me he was changing the policy, removing me. He said he owed you everything, that he'd been a fool. But then he died. And Brian said the policy was final, that I deserved it after everything. The shadows in the car seemed to pulse Frank's presence, a ghostly echo. After what, Linda? A sob broke through the line. I was pregnant, Margaret. 5 years ago, Frank's child. I lost it in the 4th month, but he'd already changed the policy to provide for the baby. He promised to change it back, but then he had the heart attack. The world stopped the rain outside a distant hum. Frank had gotten his mistress pregnant, had planned to provide for a child that never came. And Brian had known, had used that knowledge to manipulate us both. The betrayal was a chasm, swallowing the life I thought I'd known. Linda, I said, my voice steady despite the storm within. We've both been played by my son. I'm going to make this right, but I need your help. What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice trembling but resolute. Tell the truth, I said, all of it, and give me back the money that was rightfully mine. As I hung up, the rain intensified, a curtain of water blurring the world outside. The shadows in the car seemed to shift, forming a fleeting image of Frank's face, his eyes filled with regret. I blinked, and it was gone, but the whisper remained, urging me to dig deeper. Brian's betrayal was only the surface, a thread in a larger tapestry of secrets. Frank's death, the policy the memo David had found there, was more to this story hidden in the shadows of the past. I drove home, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind a crucible of rage and resolve. The rain washed the world clean, but it couldn't erase the truth. My husband had betrayed me, my son had stolen from me, and now I would uncover every secret they'd buried. The shadows were my allies now, and I would wield them like a weapon. The weekend after my call with Linda stretched like a taut wire, each hour humming with anticipation. I spent it in my new apartment, a cozy 2-bedroom overlooking Riverside Park, its windows framing the autumn leaves like a painting of forgotten dreams. The space was mine, furnished simply with a faint scent of fresh linen and possibility. But peace was elusive. The shadows in the corners seemed to whisper Frank's voice, echoing in the quiet, dig deeper. Maggie. The truth is waiting. Linda had agreed to return the stolen $500,000, her voice laced with remorse over the phone, but I knew the real battle was with Brian. He thought he could bury the secrets of Frank's affair and the forged insurance papers forever. He was wrong. I would drag them into the light. By Monday morning, my rage had crystallized into a plan as sharp as a dagger. David had filed the criminal charges: insurance fraud, elder abuse theft by deception, based on the forged documents Brian had shown Linda and the pattern of manipulation that stretched back to Frank's funeral. But I wanted more than papers and court dates. I wanted to see the fear in Brian's eyes when he realized the web he'd spun had ensnared him. I dressed in a crisp blouse and slacks, my pearl earrings glinting like talismans, and drove to his office downtown. The city streets blurred past, rain-slicked and gleaming, mirroring the storm within me. I arrived early, settling below into the lobby couch with a copy of the local paper, its headlines a mundane distraction from the shadows that seemed to cling to me, forming fleeting shapes in the periphery, a hand reaching out, a face half-formed. Brian's office was in a mid-rise building, all glass and steel, a monument to the corporate life he'd built on lies. His coworkers bustled about, oblivious to the drama unfolding. When Brian stepped off the elevator at 9:15, his face went ashen, his briefcase slipping in his grip. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Hello, Brian," I said, standing with a serene smile, my voice light, as if we were meeting for tea. "Lovely morning, isn't it? I thought we could have lunch. There's so much to catch up on." He glanced around, his cheeks flushing under the stares of his colleagues. "I'm really busy today. Can't version this wait?" "Oh, I insist," I said, my tone unyielding a velvet glove over an iron fist. In fact, I already made a reservation at Giovanni's. You remember Giovanni's, don't you? Where you took me to celebrate your promotion last year. His jaw tightened, but he nodded, defeated. Fine, but I can't stay long. Giovanni's was alive with the lunch crowd, the clink of silverware and murmur of conversations providing perfect cover for the confrontation to come. We were seated at a corner table, white linens and candlelight casting a romantic glow that felt absurdly ironic. I ordered iced tea and the pasta primavera, watching as Brian fidgeted with his menu, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. We made small talk about Emma, her school projects, her love of drawing, until his guard lowered just a fraction. Then I struck. I had the most interesting conversation with Linda Morrison yesterday. I said, my voice casual, as if discussing the weather. Brian's fork clattered against his plate, the sound sharp in the din. His face cycled through shades red, white, gray before settling on ash. Around us, diners laughed and chatted the world, moving on while my son contemplated the collapse of his empire of deceit. I don't know what Linda told you, he stammered, but whatever it is, it's not what you think. She told me everything, I said. A slow sip of my tea, savoring the moment. How you convinced her the insurance company made an error, that she deserved the full $1 million instead of the $500,000 Frank actually left her. Imagine my surprise when I realized you'd stolen $500,000 from me to cover up your father's affair. Brian's eyes widened, panic flickering like a dying flame. I was protecting you, Mom. You were devastated after Dad died. Finding out about Linda would have destroyed you completely. So you decided to profit from my ignorance instead. I said, my voice low-cutting. You forged documents, lied to the insurance company, and pocketed half my inheritance, all while convincing yourself it was for my own good. It wasn't like that. He whispered, his voice rising, then dropping as heads turned. I used that money to pay off our house to secure Emma's future. You would have just put it in savings anyway. I laughed, a sound sharp enough to slice through the restaurant's hum. You stole $500,000 from your grieving mother and convinced yourself it was charity. The arrogance is breathtaking, Brian. He leaned across the table, desperation etching lines into his face. Mom, please let me explain everything. Dad left Linda that money because she was pregnant. The world stopped spinning, the clatter of plates fading to a distant roar. What I breathed, my hand freezing on my glass. Linda was pregnant with Dad's baby. Brian said, his words tumbling out like confessions in the confessional. She lost it in the 4th month, but Dad had already changed his beneficiary to provide for the child. When she miscarried, he was going glass to change it back, but then he had the heart attack. I stared at him, the restaurant blurring the shadows at the edges of the room, pulsing with a life of their own, as if Frank's spirit was manifesting, his form flickering in the dim light hiding Brian. Frank hadn't just had an affair. He'd fathered a child with his mistress, planned a future that excluded me, and died before he could undo it. And Brian had known all along, hands hoarding the secret like a thief in the night. How long have you known? I asked, my voice a dangerous whisper, the air around us thickening, charged with an unseen energy. Linda called me right after the funeral. Brian admitted, his eyes downcast. She was a mess, grieving for Dad and dealing with the miscarriage. She showed me the medical records, the insurance paperwork, everything. I convinced her she deserved the full $1 million after what she'd been through. And I used your half to pay off our debts so you wouldn't have to worry about us struggling while you grieved. The twisted logic was almost admirable in its delusion. You stole from me to pay your bills and called it charity, I said, my rage a quiet inferno. And was you kept Frank's secret to protect his legacy or yours? Brian's. Phone buzzed on the table, shattering the moment. He glanced at it, his face draining of color. It's Jessica. She says David Morrison is at the house with papers. I smiled, slow and lethal. Oh, that'll be the criminal fraud charges. I filed them this morning. Criminal charges. Brian's voice cracked, his hands trembling. Mom, you can't be serious. Insurance fraud. Elder abuse theft by deception, I said, signaling the waiter for the check. David was quite thorough. When you forge documents and lie to insurance companies about beneficiaries, that's a felony. When you steal from your elderly mother while planning to have her declared incompetent, that's elder abuse. And with premeditation. Well, that's a pattern that goes back years. Brian's hands shook as he gripped the table. Mom, please think about Emma if I go to jail. You should have thought about Emma before you decided to become a criminal, I said, standing, leaving cash for my lunch. But don't worry about her. She'll be well provided for. In fact, she'll be getting quite a bit more inheritance than originally planned. What do you mean? He asked, his voice hoarse. I leaned down, whispering in his ear, my breath steady. Linda's giving me back the money that was rightfully mine. All of it. Turns out she's not as comfortable with theft as you are. Brian's face, crumpled tears welling in his eyes. You can't do this to me. I'm your son. You're right, I said, straightening my voice, steady as steel. You are my son, and that's what makes this so much worse. I walked out of the restaurant, the rain greeting me like an old friend washing away the remnants of our shared history. The shadows followed swirling at my feet, but now they felt like companions guardians of the truths I'd unearthed. As I climbed into my car, a fleeting vision appeared in the rear-view mirror. Frank's face etched with sorrow, mouthing I couldn't hear. Forgive me, Maggie. I blinked, but the resolve in my chest burned brighter. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice woven from the threads of betrayal. The next morning, I sat in my apartment, the television flickering with the local news, a steaming cup of coffee in my hands. The anchor's voice was grave, the screen filled with a photo of Brian in handcuffs, his face gaunt and defeated. Local insurance agent Brian Sullivan has been arrested on charges of elder abuse and insurance fraud, the reporter intoned. Authorities allege he stole over $500,000 from his mother's life insurance settlement while plotting to have her declared mentally incompetent. Sullivan faces up to 10 years in prison if convicted, plus full restitution. My phone had been ringing nonstop. Reporters, neighbors, old friends had seen the story and reached out with messages of support. I ignored them all, but one call pierced the noise. Emma's small voice trembling with fear. Grandma, Mommy's crying, and she won't tell me why Daddy isn't coming home. My heart shattered, a fresh wound amid the scars. I'll be right there, sweetheart, I said, grabbing my keys. The drive to Jessica's, now just Jessica's, with Brian. Brian behind bars was a blur, the rain pounding the windshield like accusations. I found Emma at her friend's house where Jessica had dropped her off in a panic before rushing to the jail. The 8-year-old sat on the porch clutching her stuffed rabbit, her eyes red-rimmed and lost. Are you in trouble too, Grandma? She asked, her voice small as I knelt beside her. No, baby, I said, taking her hands in mine, their warmth a lifeline. I'm not in trouble. Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices and they have to face consequences. Is Daddy a bad person? She whispered, tears spilling over. I pulled her into a hug, her small body trembling against me. Your daddy isn't bad, Emma. But he did bad things, and now he has to make them right. It's like when you break a toy, you fix it, or you learn not to break it again. Over the next few hours, as the rain eased to a drizzle, I explained everything in age-appropriate terms, my voice gentle but firm. I told her about honesty and kindness, about how taking things that don't belong to you is wrong, even if you think you have good reasons. How protecting someone sometimes means making hard choices. Emma listened, her head on my shoulder, the shadows around us softening, as if the world was granting written us this moment of grace. "Are you still mad at Daddy?" she asked. Finally, her voice muffled. I considered the question, the weight of Frank's betrayal mingling with Brian's. "I'm disappointed in your daddy, and I am sad that he hurt me," I said. "But Linda, I will always love him because he gave me you." And love means forgiving, but it also means holding people accountable. That evening, Jessica arrived to collect Emma. Her face, haggard eyes swollen from crying. She looked at me with a mix of resentment and desperation, the woman who'd once smiled sweetly while plotting my downfall. "The lawyers say he might get 5 years if he's convicted," she said, her voice breaking. "Margaret, please. I know we hurt you, but Brian's scared and confused. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive him? Drop the charges." I met, her gaze unflinching, the pearl earrings cool against my skin. A year ago, her words might have crumbled me, guilt, a chain I'd worn willingly. But now I was forged anew, opening Emma into her arms. As they drove away, the rain starting again, I felt a strange peace settle over me, the shadows retreating as if it served their purpose. The reckoning was complete, but the echoes lingered, whispering of Frank's final days, the memo David had uncovered. Had Brian's greed extended further? I pushed the thought aside for now. Justice had begun, and I would see it through. 3 months later, the courtroom was a sterile chamber of wood and echoes, the air thick with the scent of polished oak and unspoken regrets. Brian stood before the judge, his suit ill-fittings, his eyes hollow. He'd pleaded guilty to avoid a trial, the evidence too damning, the forged documents, Linda's testimony, the bank records tracing the stolen $500,000 to his accounts. The judge's gavel fell like thunder, 18 months in minimum security prison, 5 years of probation, and full restitution of $700,000 plus interest and fees. Jessica had sold the house to cover the initial payments, moving into a small apartment on the edge of town. She'd taken a job at a dental office, her days now filled with charts and scheduling appointments, a far cry from the life of leisure she'd plotted with my money. It wasn't easy, but she was learning resilience the hard way. Emma visited me every week in our time, a balm swimming in the apartment pool, baking cookies that filled the air with vanilla warmth, working on homework under the soft glow of lamplight. She was resilient the way children are, absorbing the lessons of honesty and consequences like a sponge, her laughter, a light piercing the remnants of darkness. As for me at 67, I was blooming anew. I enrolled in community college art classes, my hands rediscovering the joy of charcoal and canvas sketching scenes from Riverside Park that captured the fleeting dance of shadows. I joined a book club, the discussions a symphony of voices that filled the void left by isolation, and I volunteered at the animal shelter walking dogs, whose eyes held stories of abandonment and second chances mirroring my own. Frank's betrayal still stung in the quiet nights, a ghost in the room. But I'd learned its power. Being hurt doesn't make you weak in being kind, doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human and stronger for it. The day Brian was released from prison 6 months early for good behavior, he called me from a payphone, his voice rough with uncertainty. "Mom, it's me. I know I don't deserve it, but could we try to start over?" I stood at my window watching children play in the park, was below couples walking hand in hand. The world a tapestry of possibilities I'd nearly let slip away. The shadows outside danced in the sunlight, no longer ominous but playful, as if Frank's spirit had found peace. Yes, I said finally, my voice steady. But this time we do it on my terms. Some stories end in ashes, others in flames of renewal. Mine burned bright, a victory forged from betrayal, leading to a horizon of quiet triumph. The autumn sun spilled through my apartment window, painting the hardwood floor with golden light that danced like a memory of forgotten summers. At 67, I stood in my new home, a modest two-bedroom haven overlooking Riverside Park, where the trees whispered secrets in their fiery hues. The air smelled of fresh coffee and the lavender candles I had lit to mark my first month here, a ritual of reclaiming my space. My old life, bound by Brian and Jessica's deceit, shadowed by Frank's betrayal, was gone, burned away like leaves in a bonfire. In its place, I was building something new, something mine. Yet even in this quiet triumph, the shadows lingered soft and watchful as if Frank's presence still hovered, waiting to speak. The courtroom had been the final act of the drama that began with Emma's whispered warning. Brian's guilty plea had secured him an 18-month sentence in a minimum security facility, a consequence that felt both heavy and just. Jessica, stripped of the house they'd bought with my money, had moved into a cramped apartment on the edge of town. Her days now filled with the grind of a dental receptionist's job. The $700,000 restitution, covering the $600,000 I'd given them, plus interest and damages, was a weight they'd carry for years, a reminder of the cost of greed. But for me, it wasn't about the money. It was about justice, about reclaiming the power they thought they could steal. I sipped my coffee, standing at the window watching children chase each other through the park below. Their laughter echoed a sound that stirred memories of Emma's visits. She came every weekend now, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her eyes bright with stories of school and dreams of being an artist. We'd swim in the apartment pool, her giggles splashing like sunlight, or bake cookies that filled the air with vanilla warmth. Those moments were my anchor proof that love could endure even the deepest betrayals. But each visit also carried a question unspoken but heavy. What else had Frank hidden, and why did the shadows still whisper his name? My new life unfolded like a canvas, each day a stroke of color I hadn't dared to paint before. I enrolled in an art class at the community college, my hands rediscovering the joy of charcoal and watercolor. My sketches captured the park's shifting moods, trees bending in the wind, shadows pooling like secrets under the oaks. The instructor, a woman with silver hair and a knowing smile, praised my work, saying I had an eye for the unseen. Her words lingered, a reminder of the strange intuition that had guided me through this ordeal, the whispers in the dark that had urged me to fight. I joined a book club at the local library where a circle of women, some widowed, some divorced, all fierce in their own way, became my new family. We dissected novels over tea, our laughter, a balm our debates, a spark that rekindled my mind. They called me Maggie, not Mom or Grandma, and in their eyes I saw myself anew, not a victim, but a survivor, a woman who'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger. Yet during quiet moments when the discussion turned to love and loss, I'd feel a chill, as if Frank's shadow passed through the room, his voice a faint echo. I tried Maggie. Volunteering at the animal shelter brought a different kind of healing. I walked dogs whose eyes held stories of abandonment, their tentative trust mirroring my own journey. There was a gray mutt named Shadow with a limp and a wary gaze who followed me like a guardian. When I took him through the park, the autumn leaves seemed to glow brighter, as if the world was conspiring to show me beauty again. But even there, the shadows moved, forming fleeting shapes. A hand, a silhouette that vanished when I looked too long. They weren't threatening, not anymore, but they were a reminder that some truths remained buried, waiting. Emma's visits were the heart of my new life, each one a thread weaving us closer. One Saturday, as we sat on my balcony painting watercolors, she looked up her brush poised over a canvas of swirling blues. "Grandma, do you think Daddy will ever come home?" The question pierced me, a reminder of the delicate balance I walked, protecting her innocence while teaching her truth. I set down my brush, choosing my words carefully. "Your daddy will be home in about a year, sweetheart," I said, my voice soft. "He made some big mistakes, but he's working to make them right. Like when I broke your vase and said I was sorry, she asked, her eyes wide, searching." "Exactly," I said, smiling, though my heart ached. Sometimes sorry means fixing what you broke, even if it takes time. And sometimes it means learning to be better. She nodded, returning to her painting, and I watched her, marveling at her resilience. I told her about Brian's mistakes in simple terms. How taking things that don't belong to you is wrong. How honesty is a choice that shapes who you are. But I didn't tell her about Frank's affair, or the child that never was, or the money stolen from me. Those were shadows she didn't need to carry, not yet. Still, as we painted, a breeze stirred the air, carrying a faint whisper like Frank's voice saying, "She's strong, like you." I glanced at the sky, half expecting to see his face in the clouds, but there was only blue, vast and endless. Jessica called occasionally, her voice strained, asking about Emma's visits or pleading for leniency with Brian's restitution. I was polite but firm, setting boundaries that felt like reclaiming pieces of myself. "Jessica," I said during one call, my voice steady, "you made choices, and now you're living with them. Focus on Emma. She's what matters." She didn't argue, perhaps because she knew I was right, or because the weight of her new life, bills, a job, a child to raise alone, had humbled her. The house sold to cover the restitution had left her with little, but I felt no pity. She'd chosen her path just as I'd chosen mine. The shadows in my apartment seemed to nod in agreement, their presence softer now, as if approving my resolve. The restitution payments began arriving small but steady, wired to my new account at Commerce Bank. The $700,000 would come slowly, but it was a start, a tangible reminder that justice wasn't just a concept, it was real, measurable, mine. I didn't need the money to live. My savings and Social Security were enough for my simple life. But the principle mattered. Every dollar was a brick in the foundation of my new self, a testament to the woman who'd refused to be broken. A year after Brian's sentencing, on a crisp spring morning, my phone rang, the number unfamiliar but local. I answered, expecting a neighbor or a book club friend, but the voice on the other end stopped me cold. "Mom, it's Brian." I froze, my coffee mug halfway to my lips, the park outside my windows suddenly still as if the world was holding its breath. "Brian," I said, my voice calm but guarded. "You're out." "Yeah," he said, his voice rough, hesitant. "Good behavior. I know I don't deserve to call you, but I needed to hear your voice." The shadows in the room stirred a gentle ripple as if Frank was listening, waiting. I set my mug down, my heart a tangle of emotions, anger, sorrow, a flicker of hope. "What do you want, Brian, and to start over?" he said, his words trembling. "I messed up, Mom. I know that now. I hurt you, and I am so sorry. Can we try again? Please." I closed my eyes, picturing the boy he'd been laughing in our backyard, holding Frank's hand, promising to make us proud. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who'd stolen from me, betrayed me, but who was still my son. The shadows seemed to soften their edges, blurring as if urging me toward grace. Yes, I said finally, my voice steady but firm. But it's on my terms, Brian. Trust is earned, not given. I understand, he said, relief flooding his voice. So see, I'll do whatever it takes. Good, I said, standing at the window, watching a couple walk hand in hand through the park. Start by being a father to Emma. She needs you now more than ever. As I hung up, the shadows stilled the air, lightening as if a weight had lifted. Frank's presence, so vivid in the darkest moments, seemed to fade, his whisper replaced by a quiet peace. I'd faced the worst of his secrets, his affair, the child, the money, and emerged not just whole, but stronger. The shadows were no longer threats, but companions, reminders of the truths I had uncovered and the power I'd reclaimed. That evening, I sat with Emma on my balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of rose and gold. She was sketching a dragon, its wings spread wide, its eyes fierce but kind. "Grandma," she said, looking up, "are you happy now?" I smiled, my heart full, the shadows behind us soft and silent. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, brushing her hair from her face. "I'm happier than I've been in a long time. And you know why?" "Why?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Because I learned that being hurt doesn't make you weak and being kind doesn't make you foolish." I said, my voice warm, steady. "It makes you strong enough to start over no matter how old you are." She grinned, returning to her dragon, and I leaned back, the sunset warming my skin. The shadows were still there, faint and watchful, but they no longer carried Frank's voice. They were mine now, a part of the woman I'd become. A woman who'd faced betrayal, fought for justice, and built a life that glowed with quiet triumph. The mystery of Frank's final days lingered, a thread I might one day pull, but for now, I was content. The horizon stretched before me vast and open, a canvas for a story only I could write.